Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. It is part of our monthly diplomatic series initiative where we invite senior diplomats for a conversation on what is happening in their country, in their ties with India, and how the world is changing for them and for us. And in this, as part of that conversation, we are privileged to have not one but two senior diplomats from Delhi. Jan Thesleff, Ambassador of Sweden to India, and Diana Mickevičienė, Ambassador of Lithuania to India. Both of them have looked at India, engaged with India for a long time, and in fact, Ambassador Her Excellency has just completed 30 years for India engagement broadly. So she's also celebrating 3 decades of a rapport with India, and how much I think she knows probably more than many of us here in the room about what is happening in this country. But we are here also to talk about Europe, and this is a good combination of Nordic and Baltic states here with us to look at the dramatic transformation happening in Europe, Europe's worldview, European security, and we hope to get some sense, some perspective from His Excellency Thesleff about Sweden's accession to NATO, what it means for European security architecture, what it means for Europe and for the world, and for India, Europe, India, Sweden relationship as well. So we have a lot to cover, and I know Ambassador Thesleff has to leave around 5 or just before 5, so we have limited time with us. I will give the floor first to the Excellencies for their initial remarks, opening remarks, and then we will have an open conversation with all of you.
Thank you so much. This is a great opportunity to be here with you today. And I'm very happy to be here with my colleague, Diana, because somehow we represent the topic of today, the Nordic-Baltic connection, by extension maybe the NB8, the 5 Nordic countries and the 3 Baltic countries. And if I'm not incorrectly informed, I think also Lithuania this year is having the presidency of the Baltic Council of Ministers, and Sweden is holding the presidency of the Nordic Council of Ministers. So somehow this all comes together. It's not in all parts of the world that let's say the Nordic-Baltic or Nordic concept is that known, but actually in India, I think that the recognition and the way India is approaching our part of the world has very often a Nordic touch to it and a Baltic touch to it. And we saw that through ORF, we see that through the Ministry for External Affairs, we saw that at the Raisina dialogue, where there was a special NB8 focus. And actually, the NB8, the 8 countries, were there at ministerial level. So somehow what we are doing today is a little bit of a prolongation or continuation of what we started at Raisina. So that's also something very, I think, important to say. I think it goes without saying, we are geographically interlinked, but geography is not everything. There is also history, there is economic and cultural ties. When I grew up in Sweden, in southern Sweden, and on my way to school, I passed the Baltic House, the House of the Baltic States. This was during the Soviet era, but there were always light and conferences and cultural events. So somehow this cultural link has always been there. And we are all, if we look at it in more modern terms, we are advanced economies. If we put those together, we very often in India talk about G20, but if you put us together, we are actually G10. So quite a powerhouse even economically. And a big important aspect is also that we are fully integrated into the world's most largest single market area, the European common market. And that goes even for those countries, Iceland and Norway, that are not EU members. And many of us are part of the Euro zone. I guess that Sweden and Denmark stand out as non-Euro members, even though the Danish currency at least is pegged to the Euro. So there is a closer connection. So in this NB8 concept, we focus very much, as we did at Racina and as we will do today, on foreign and security policy. In the new situation where we live in since February 2022, of course, this is natural. And when we were here in Delhi in February, I think it was felt strongly by all of us how the Nordic Baltics have come even closer together when we go for global outreach for Ukraine. And that is, I think, will be part of our session today. Our worldview, Swedish worldview, is very much colored by our focus on human rights, democracy, multilateralism, and sustainability. For us, the most significant foreign policy platform we have is the EU. Apart from that platform, we have maintained very strong bilateral ties, notably transatlantic ties, and I'll come back to those, with the US, but also with India. So I think that that is also something that puts its mark on our relations. We have, I think, as many other countries, for sure India, we have a focus on global challenges. Climate, sustainability is very much on our minds. We have done that together also with India. We co-founded and co-shared the leadership group for industry transition, shared by the two prime ministers, Prime Minister of India and Prime Minister of Sweden. Since 2019, we renewed it at COP28 in Dubai, and we will again develop that concept at the upcoming COP. A lot of Indian companies are involved in this. A lot of international companies, a total of 18 countries are engaged. I think Sweden, if you had asked me or invited me a couple of years ago, you would have asked me to speak about Sweden's neutrality, Sweden's history of non-alignment. And this is truly something that goes back to basically to 1812, when our then soon-to-be king formulated the policy of neutrality at war and non-alignment in peace. And this has somehow formed our policy until very recently. And somehow our NATO accession to become a NATO ally is a paradigm shift for us, but it's not something that came, from out of nothing. Actually, our policy, neutrality, non-alignment, has not been linear in the sense that there's not been any deviations from that line from 1812 until 2022. Already in the Crimean War, 1853, 1856, British Navy used the island of Gotland in the Baltic Sea. We've seen during the Finnish Winter War, extensive military and of course other support came from Sweden to Finland. Second World War, the coalition government in Sweden also made concessions. etc., etc. And during the Cold War, there were already then discussions about some kind of Scandinavian defense union. But two countries, Norway and Denmark, already in those days decided to go their way and joined NATO, while Sweden and Finland, and very much I would like to see Sweden and Finland here as a couple in a way, stayed outside. And then the fall of the first, let's say, crack in this came in with the fall of the Soviet Union. Neutrality disappeared as a principle for us when we joined the European Union in 1995. And then we started gradually, we became members of the Partnership for Peace in 94. We joined different kinds of peace support missions of NATO, Kosovo, Afghanistan, Libya. We were under NATO command for the first time in Bosnia-Herzegovina. And I mean, there were a gradual steps. But in 2022, something happened. I don't need to mention what happened, but we all, I think, will refer to the war of aggression of Russia on Ukraine that triggered something that brought Finland 11 months ahead of us, and thereafter Sweden this year into the alliance. I don't know if you want me to stop here and give the floor to my colleague Diana, and then I can come back maybe through questions and in discussion. But I just wanted to give you a little bit of, let's say, a taste of where we are at and where we are going. We see the nature of NATO, of defense and deterrence as a necessary step. I don't think we would have been part of the NATO this quickly if what happened in 2022 had not been there. This was really a trigger that maybe made it into the paradigm shift, even though it had been a gradual process somehow. We think that by being member of NATO, Sweden becomes safer and NATO becomes stronger. This is not a threat to Russia in any way. We are not a threat to Russia. And our membership of the alliance is not a threat to Russia. But it was a necessary step that was necessary at that time. And if you look at the public opinion that had been very much in favor of the neutrality of the non-alignment, shifted extremely quickly. And that same public opinion, if you look at the support for Ukraine, of support of Ukraine in humanitarian terms, in military terms, in political terms, in financial terms, in my country, is extremely strong. We talk about 96, 97%, depending on the different kinds of support we talk about. So almost unanimity on the policy that we have assumed when it comes to supporting Ukraine.
Thank you, Excellency, for this. And I think there are some issues which we can disentangle later on. But let me first give her comments, and then we'll come back to some of these questions.
Thank you, Dr. Pant. Thank you, dear colleague, Jan, Ambassador of Sweden, dear friends. It's an honor and pleasure to be here in this hot seat, shall I say, the second time in 2 years that I'm here. I'm very honored to be invited to share my thoughts together with a Nordic colleague, because I can only testify to what my colleague has just said about how cohesive our region has always been. And this is just so much more than geographical cohesion. We are connected in many other ways. But also, I think what happened in a security situation in Europe, in Eastern and Nordic Europe, also testifies to the way how, in a similar way, we took and we evaluated the changes that have happened with the Russian war, which changed the situation so dramatically on the level of people's perception that you basically don't ask questions why. Everybody is absolutely aware of why, and otherwise you would never. The government could campaign for decades, I guess, to achieve such a change. And this would probably not even happen. However, it's a very serious signal of how things have changed in Europe, what a neighbor we have, whose trajectory, in fact, we have been being very close in the neighborhood, have been observing. And the Russian war, which the war of 22, because there have been actually several incursions and walks and across the border and other things, Transnistria, Georgia, just to name a few, Crimea, which so dramatically changed the perception of others. But in the Baltics, I guess this was something, we sort of knew it. We were shocked, but we were not surprised. And that's what actually my minister told. I'm just stealing a quote from my minister. Yes, we were not surprised, no matter how shocking was what Russia started in February 22, because whole signage, whole series of, verbal, non-verbal, other communications and internal developments in Russia was just indicated to something very imminent. So if I could start, right, Nordics Baltics, we were of course very happy when India, in the person of Minister of External Affairs, drew that vertical, the new vertical for India's foreign policy last year, but not probably a little earlier. I mean, the signs and the discussions we used to have, we saw that we were becoming an important vertical. Because this is a region, Nordic Baltics is a region where we feel very cozy, we feel very much integrated economically, financially, infrastructurally, energy, bridges and transportation and everything. And even I don't want to use the word ideologically because it's something with a slightly negative tinge. But I could tell in a very simple language. When we were occupied and we were under Soviet Union, the closest way to escape through the normal world was to Sweden by boat, and that was the coast, which was guarded very, very heavily by Soviet guards. They would actually go through that sandy beach. Every night they will even the sand so that every footprint, any trace of anyone trying to cross at night would be visible and would be caught. That people actually died trying to cross that very short stretch to Gotland, the same Gotland which you mentioned, and that was like a lighthouse, the closest lighthouse. We could, stand at least on the shore and look, it's not visible. You can't see Gotland. It's still far enough. But you would know that freedom is actually not that very far away. And this is what I remember as a small child. So we are, of course, very happy to be on India's radar. And we are very happy to finally get an embassy of India functioning in Lithuania, Estonia a couple of years ago. This year, I believe the Indian embassy is being set up in Latvia. So all the 3 Baltics will be covered. This only shows how we lag behind our Nordic friends, because they have a very well-developed dialogue on the top level, on the senior-most level, to which we still have to sort of run very fast to somehow catch up. But I think India has stretched out a hand, and we are taking that hand very firmly, very decidedly, and we will catch up because, in fact, I think that one other element in which we are very much united is the high-tech orientation of our economies is very much high-tech. We are investing in the people, in the people's knowledge, know-how. We're creating technologies, and every country has very, very particular boutique niche technologies, which they will be happy to share with India and, in fact, use the big market of India to multiply into a really, big action, including us, the small Baltics countries, to make it a very, mutually beneficial relationship. Now, if I could just, go astride, so to say, a few principles of Lithuanian foreign policy, and also reflect how the latest developments, meaning Russia, but also in our case, it was also a peculiar experience with China, how it has been reflected in the foreign policy and also in the public, I would say, view. So when we liberated ourselves in the 91, whichever date you take, very, I would say immediately, the two absolute priorities that all governments have focused, and I have to say we are probably the most anti-incumbency country in the world, because in the 34 years we have not re-elected a government even a single time. So we normally are fine with an idea that we'll have elections and the government will change. But that also shows how much consensual the principles have been, and they remain. And there were two, basically, European Union, integration into European Union from the very early 90s, and the same integration into NATO. Because while, of course, at some point the world was pondering with an idea of democratic Russia, but many things, in fact, were in the air, which told us that things might not be as easy to us. So NATO integration became like a very, and I remember we were so persistent, we were like this mosquito in the room, that all is very nice, we are all, forging ahead to a bright future, but we have to be in NATO, because at some point we felt it was needed. So, finally we got both into European Union and into NATO. And I have to stress how difficult it was, how demanding the process was, how many hurdles we had to face. So when I hear sometimes in Indian public space that, oh, NATO has expanded, took over, it's like some sort of amorphic creature which was crawling and swallowed us, I have to say that the process was actually very much opposite. We were that very obstinate mosquito buzzing all the time, that we had security, we needed security guarantees. Because by 1992, Moldova lost a piece of land across the river, Transnistria, no man's land was formed. Then, of course, Georgia came, and 20% of Georgian territory is still, taken away from her. And many other signages which we can read because we know the language, we know also the non-verbal sort of aspects of communication from the Russian public space, was telling us that this was necessary. So, of course, what happens in 2020, okay, 2014 was another big thing, but 2022 was, like I have told you, moment for us. Of course, we realize that we exist only because we are in NATO, because had we not been, we would have been the most vulnerable and the first, sort of catch to take. And I have no apologetic feelings about saying that I sit here as an ambassador of sovereign country just because, NATO expanded, or we have been able to get into NATO. And then the transformation in the neighboring countries, the two very obstinately neutral countries, because you have, and Finland has this very, tradition of neutrality, which you kept for so long, is just yet another validation that I think we are again on the same page about reading the situation. Again, even before Russia started this war, we've been having a very interesting but difficult process of relations with China, which has, for some reasons, decided that it could pressurize us on little things, on small things, on big things, whichever things, because small countries would, they would have to. Everybody was very dependent on trade and so on. And we did have some trade, of course, but we have invested very heavily in promoting relations, economic relations with China. So the successes, I would say, were still very limited. But unexpectedly, after a number of attempts to influence even our internal situation, even to push around the citizens protesting on Lithuanian soil and saying, you can't say things around China, we've pushed back. And that was still before the previous government was in power. So when I was posted as ambassador to China in 2020, I knew that it was going to be a rough posting, because we were already having lots of problems, but we were hoping we will be able to discuss them somehow. Well, my term was barely 1 year. I had to leave. I was asked to leave, and because several other developments happened, which we think was our sovereign right. Being a small country, we can still define our own sovereignty. However, our Chinese friends thought otherwise. So ultimately, we can no longer have relations on ambassadorial level. Yes, the last moment, but not clearly the reason, probably the outcome of the whole process was that we have allowed Taiwanese non-diplomatic representative office to be set up on Lithuanian soil. Again, such offices exist in 70 plus countries. However, we were told that China is different nowadays and we can no longer tolerate new offices being set up. So we resisted that. And then the government, which came into power around that time, formulated something that I want to present as a principle of the current government's foreign policy, which is called values-based foreign policy. It's a slogan or a name, you could say, for a foreign policy, which basically says it actually says that it's always best and most secure for a country to invest in friendships with other countries with whom we share certain understandings. Values is a relative term. I don't want to discuss whose values and what values. I believe in universal values, and I don't want to agree that UN Charter inscribed values are Western or Eastern or whatever. I still think it's the universality that is there. But what we also thought, and I think it was validated in 3 years at least of the government's mandate, that it actually pays you well if you invest in relationships with countries that you speak about the same things. So with trade booms, you are not afraid that your trade would suddenly be banned for political reasons. You are not fearing economic boycotts, crisis, and so on. And this is a policy we have kept for about 3.5 years now, and I think we are fine. As a result, of course, because of China boycotted the trade with Lithuania, the trade with China went down. But since we didn't give in, I think it's bouncing back to some extent while we're not even promoting it, because there are certain things that they need. But trade with other countries in Indo-Pacific with whom we share values or principles or the same adherence has really grown up, and I'm very happy to be. And the final point I want to make is that while we are being very small and quite far away from Indo-Pacific shores, last year my government also adopted Indo-Pacific strategy, which is a government document adopted by the government, where the same principles are laid out with some sort of programs. We have programs under this Indo-Pacific strategy, how to work with the like-minded countries, how to foster relations, trade, economic, social, educational links, without fearing the fallouts of what happens to you if you try to befriend a dictator. Well, it is, of course, everybody's right to debate this policy, but I think it has paid us well, and that's what the government wants to say, that values-based policy pays you back. It increases your security. So I'll stop here.
Thank you very much. I think we got a very good overview from both the ambassadors. If I may just come back with one set of questions, which I think a lot of people in the audience would be very interested to hear your views on. How do you see the current war, the situation, the security situation vis-a-vis Russia and Ukraine evolving? Do you see any peace process moving forward? I know there are multiple options on the table, if there are, but from your perspective, what guarantees long-term sustainability of any kind of initiative on the ground? And how do you see this unfold? Because we still don't know, and we still see both sides committed to conflict, in the sense that committed to battlefield realities. Do you see this phase moving into a negotiated endeavor anytime soon, or are we still looking for this kind of stasis on the battlefield for some time to come, because that's where the two armies are? So how do you see that process unfolding from your vantage point?
I would not really comment the situation on the battlefield. I think we all possess the same information. But on that conceptual level, to us it is very clear that the only security, premise for the region would be Russia withdrawing back to its own proper territory, which means Ukraine winning. And there is just no other way out. And one thing that I really do not agree in interpreting this war of Russia, and we call it Russian war, not Ukraine war, and we really very peculiar about the language, because some sort of a moral blame or whatever is attached or equally distributed, but this is something we don't agree with. So it's, of course, it's good to have peace agreements, but it's very difficult for me to agree how you can, have equivocal distance between an aggressor and the victim, and how you can have the same sets of demands for the two, because one of them is fighting barely for survival, and another one is fighting, I don't know even what, but land. They need land. Russia needs more land. Why? You tell me. Why it does need? It's such a huge country which has got all the possible chemical, elements under its ground. So, and that's exactly where we have a problem to sort of, urge both countries to stop. Because if Russia stops fighting, the war is over. That's it. It's very simple. If Ukraine stops fighting, Ukraine is over. It's just, again, very, very difficult for me to agree. But bottom line is what I want to say, and I always tell my Indian friends, no matter how this ends on the battlefield, no matter if Russia takes another 2 villages or 10 villages or 20 villages, Russia has lost Ukraine for good. Forget, This is also psychological. The new modern and yet very, very strong nation has emerged, no matter where you draw the border. And we insist that the border should be restored to the original ones because nobody had an issue with them. But the hatred, it stays, I was just told, it stays 2-3 generations in the family. So if you have already half of the Ukrainians who have suffered the losses, and then, the president is also under the obligation to put any deal that he negotiates under the popular referendum, and he will have to do this. So, it's quite possible that, the popular referendum will decide that. So no matter what happens later on, we are not going back to any because its situation has just evolved so much. And of course, with our own evolving, sort of validation of our own concerns and the concerns that have been expressed in the neighborhood by Sweden and Finland joining NATO so quickly, the situation has moved ahead very dramatically. So, of course, we talk from our own perspective, not just going back to preserving original borders of Ukraine because they are the only legal borders. This is just the only possibility for the legal, basis, but also about the responsibility for crimes that have been committed. And European Union has been already discussing the reconstruction of Ukraine. So, while we are all very eager to see the peace coming to Ukrainian lands, but much has been done to plan something ahead. And we just don't have choice. See, that's so simple. You are pushed against your own existential nerves or instincts. This is what Ukraine has been suffering, but us too, in a sense, we have agreed. So, yeah, of course, UN principles, all the, agreements. The only problem that is there, that Ukrainians no longer believe Russia. How can you tell them to believe Russia if Russia has already broken everything they had, committed to? So that's where persuading Russia to come back to its commitments is the key to that.
Diana, you have said, taken many of the words out of my mouth too, but I think what we need to remember is that this was a war that was a war of aggression started by Russia, and Russia can also end that war. I think that we must not forget it's a man-made war, and we know who started that. That, I think, is the first thing. And the second thing is that I come from a country, we both come from countries that hold two things very high, and that is dialogue and diplomacy. I think in all, in the United Nations, wherever we are, dialogue and diplomacy are, let's say, holy words for us. But when it comes to this, you asked, is it time for negotiations? Is it time for something? The only one who can judge that is Ukraine. It's not for us to, not now, not later. It's in the hands of the Ukrainians. And also, as my colleague said, of course, this has most likely or will have to be submitted to the people of Ukraine. And the longer time that goes, of course, the deeper the wounds. We all know that. But it's in the Ukrainian hands. It's not in Swedish hands or Lithuanian hands to determine when and where the time is ripe for this or that.
I just to take this conversation forward a bit, I think taking that point, of course, it is for the Ukrainians to decide how, under what conditions the war gets terminated. But there is also, in some ways, an objective reality that they also face, which is the support from European Union and from their partners. And I think what, at least for us who view this from, as an external actors in this process, you do see in some parts of Europe some concern about the longevity of the war, about how long this political support can be sustained. We have seen an interesting debate for example, in the US itself about what may or may not happen with a different set of political dispensation in power. So I would be interested to hear your thoughts in terms of how do you assess that situation, because ultimately support for Ukraine is also contingent on some of those realities. So while you might be very supportive, does that mean that in the sense of objective hard power support that is going to Ukraine, how far that process is sustainable, given the internal debates within Europe about some of the issues that have originated over the last 2 years, because that's also a debate that is part of this reality. So while Sweden and Lithuania might be together on this, there are some countries that are also discussing it through a different lens. So how do you then look at it through a European perspective and say that, look, we would be able to hold on that kind of support that we have been providing Ukraine over the course of this war? How do you assess that situation?
Yes, of course, there are debates, and I think both my colleague and me have always stressed that people's voices really matter, and we see it in action. The government acts because there is people's support, or the lack of it, for that matter. So, yeah, you take it in, again, look at the longer term perspective. In fact, the Baltics, at least, I don't know how about the Nordics, but the Baltics were pleasantly surprised about the level of support that came up, because we were worried, and I think our voices were at some point neglected, for especially after Crimea was taken away from Ukraine, that that our partners might not look at this seriously enough. So, and how it has evolved. Support to Ukraine has evolved tremendously. So, of course, the war does cost us, and of course, the voters feel the cost, the bear the brunt, the economic. Normally, it's what? It's economic. Much of, in fact, the difficulties are also ascribed to this, while, of course, there are just the difficulties of yet another matter. So, of course, the Russian propaganda works very nicely to use any tension, any difficulty that they can sort of grasp to put it, to formulate it in a, like, blaming the war for that whole thing. Why much of the blame, in fact, has been very much inflated. But I always thought, and I still believe that Europe has enough of sort of layers of fat to survive it economically. It's not really something. It's been a rich, continent and rich economies which can definitely bear that, because what we always say that this is still a cheaper version. Having Ukraine win or come out of that war, winning, surviving as a country within the legitimate borders, is a cheaper version than what can happen, in case we're not able to. So it's an evolving debate. Again, I can't really commit much because this is what my government is doing, our governments are doing. There are debates, endless debates. They get reflected in various electoral campaigns, of course. But I'm actually quite optimistic because by and large, if you look at the electoral cycles, and maybe it's European Union which has this unique, it gives unique environment in case some sort of a, slightly off the mainstream forces take one or not the country, but one area, then there is always a balancing act. The voters actually react very much to what happens in the. So I'm very positive, and I'm still very optimistic. And our message is that yes, they do need that support because the opposite would be costlier, and then it would really cost us very dear. That's the only thing I can say.
I think that if we look at the track record of Europe, when Europe comes under pressure, Europe gets together. We saw it during the pandemic. We see it in face of the war of aggression. And we might be the extremes of Europe in a way when it comes to, let's say, how our public opinions view support. But if we look at the general EU support for Ukraine after 2.5 years, according to statistics, it says that humanitarian aid supported by 89% of EU citizens, not talking about Swedes, not Lithuanians, EU citizens, welcoming refugees, 84%, sanctions on Russia, 72%, financial support for Ukraine, 72%. So, I mean, that's not bad if we look at it. So I think that there are those in this world who want to see division among us. I mean, there's always like that. Are they strong enough? Will they endure? Are they resilient? I think we have proven that we have been resilient and we can get our act together. At the same time, we are 27 states within the European Union. We have different opinions, and we should have different opinions. That's the beauty of the union. The debate, the interaction where we arrive at conclusions and decisions together should be one of debate. If everyone thought the same, if everyone argued the same from the beginning, there would be something wrong. Then it wouldn't be Europe. So I think that we should not underestimate the basic support, and now I talked about the grassroots support, not the one that comes from politicians or from those who have it as a job to do it, but those who actually also live the consequences of that support, because we know you spend more here, you spend less somewhere else, but people have shown that they are prepared to do that.
Excellencies, before I open this up for the audience, very brief comments from you on India and Nordic and Baltic relationships. If you can just briefly, what are the areas we are working on and what are the areas we are aiming to achieve and accomplish?
My voice now, but I come back. Sweden and India, I think, have a unique relationship in the sense that it's a very broad one. And what we want to offer and what we can offer India seems to me also to be what India is looking for from us. And I will go into that. My country has somewhat more than 10 million inhabitants. I was going to say it's the size of Chanakya. No, it's not, but maybe half of Delhi if we are very conservative about the size of Delhi. But the features that this society has is that when it comes to the innovative power of the country, We are in the top tiers globally. When it comes to producing unicorns per capita, Silicon Valley, Sweden, and I'm sure very soon, or maybe already Bangalore, are at the top of these things. We have invested over decades 3.4% of our GDP into research and development. And what we did very early on, I'm going to tell you this story just to link it up with India, actually. We have had this close, and I must say successful marriage between private and public side of society. So private enterprise and the government, and the third leg, the academia. And when we when we work together with our Indian friends, and we work closely with them, this is very much what India is also achieving now. They are capturing, there are 2 million STEM graduates coming out of India every year. These people, talented people, needs to be put to work, and they are the new engine of growth, of success of India. So what we do is, we have now 280 companies here. 2 companies come in every month into India, establishing themselves. They employ together 240,000 Indians directly, 2.5 million Indians indirectly. And if we look at Swedish-owned companies in India, they employ over 400,000 Indians. And they are, most of them, in this kind of high-tech, innovative sectors. We also try to attract, and that comes also to what India is looking for, to attract talent from India. I was looking at statistics on my way here in the car, of different groups from different countries who have settled down in our country. And they have settled down for very different reasons. Some of them have been driven out of their countries because of war, because of economic hardships, and some of them, like the Indian contingent, have come out of their choice. So in 2030, 1% of my population, the population of Sweden, will be Indian. Today, 0.7%. If you compare that to those who have fled war or hardships, that's equal approximately to the number of Palestinians we have in Sweden. The Indians came out of their choice. And when I talk to Indian officials, Indian friends, Indian business people, in the past we talked about remittances. Remittances in the shape of people going abroad, earning money, sending money home to their families, and thereby giving, nurturing the local economy. I think in the case of India, and in the case of Sweden, is the intellectual remittances that these people who come to us to do their post-grad studies in Sweden. We basically have no undergrads. It's only postgraduate students who afterwards find a job with one of the 90 Indian companies, or one of the thousands of Swedish companies that wants to hire them. That is what will nurture India. That is what will build our relationship for the future. I get excited now, I'm sorry. I will, and I can go on, but really, this is a long-term strategy of how, I always tell everyone at home and everyone here also, don't think of what you want to sell, think of what people want to buy. And that is, I think, what India wants to absorb from us, and that is equal to what we want to offer.
Well, when I listen to you, Jan, I get very, very jealous. Well, I wish, Lithuania is even smaller than Sweden, We are 3 million, which is strictly speaking what South Delhi maybe, or Manipur population perhaps. But I wish I could say that, so it's 3.5 times less than Sweden. So, but I wish I could, divide the numbers you have given by 3.5 and we'll get the numbers for us, which is not yet unfortunately true. I mentioned briefly that we have a very long way to run and catch up with our Nordic friends. And we are in a situation when I finally have my counterpart in Lithuania. We have our usual, discussions and talks. What to do is really very nice. It's a very different level of working, and I remember tomorrow I'm celebrating my 30 years of first arrival in Delhi, where I came for a FSI organized and sponsored course for young diplomats. We didn't have an embassy in Delhi those days. 94, it was not even anywhere in the horizon. So I still saw so much of progress that it gives me, right to be very optimistic. I think we'll catch up much faster than you would normally, because this is also, there is a lot of, attention and effort from the Indian side as well. So we are happy to work. Well, I think I would only be able to boast about 4 or 5 countries from Lithuania and India, but some of their achievements are also inspiring. For example, I was told last year that in terms of IoT hardware for connectivity, for telematics, specifically, we have 1/3 of Indian market. So even Aadhaar in the second stage of development, when you will have second generation cards, will have some Lithuanian imprint, because our biometrics company has been outsourced for a little part of that, the functionality which is called the duplication, which will make sure that no duplicate identities are there in the system. And several other such examples, but they all indicate to one thing, that this will be a high-tech relationship. Definitely, like we see, with India's relationships with other Nordics countries, and that this should be a relationship which is not defined by trade anymore. Yeah, trade numbers are at the moment limited, but the modern interconnected economies are no longer defined by trade figures, because you trade something much more, which is not always visible, which is earned by people from both sides living across on another side and producing and creating and jointly designing or jointly researching. So that's a partnership we, and I think we are a very good. I mean, by being a tiny dot on the map, we are again for startups. I was just given the recent statistics: 16th in the world for startups, not bad. Cybersecurity 6th in the world, not bad. We win normally 4 or 5 medals in the Olympics. Not bad for a 3 million country. So I guess we are a really good place to create things. And then, as I said, multiply in the huge market of India. Whatever successfully works on a small scale economy like ours, which is very globally integrated, that would work very beautifully here. We're also connected by strong civilizational links. I always, do not hesitate to remind that our language, together with Latvian language for that matter, is the closest living sister language of Sanskrit. So there is something in that, we do a lot of research on that. And I look at it very positively. But yes, I think we just started running. So, I mean, I'll be able to boast about results in some years.
Thing, I think that we are here at ORF, and I think we should give a lot of credit to you also, and to the Ministry for External Affairs, because what we have been talking about today, and the let's say the cooperation that we've had actually since a very long time. I think your Baltic Council of Ministers was created quite shortly after independence. 92. We started in 52 within the Nordics. Then we formed the Council of Ministers in 71, etc. So long-term collaborations, but that actually have not had that much external visibility. A lot has been done between us. We have connected our electricity grids and everything, but externally, not so much. until now. And in India, ORF, Dr. Saran, your external affairs minister and others have actually seen this group and seen that we somehow, there is something that binds us together, not only geography, and approached us as such. And I think that's something that has not happened everywhere in the world. And so really, we are grateful to you for having seen what we have been doing up north for quite a while.
Now let me open this up for your questions, comments, observations. Please introduce yourselves, be brief, and if you are addressing your question to one of the guests, please mention that as well. We'll take a group of 3 questions every round. So, yes, sir.
Good evening. I'm Rajiv Sinha, and I'm a distinguished fellow here at the ORF. It's been mentioned in the conversation that the membership of the alliance in terms of Lithuania and Sweden or Finland, for that matter, is not a threat to Russia. And but on the other hand, while your statement is to be accepted, Russia feels otherwise. It feels provoked and feels that it has to react in the interests of its own national security concerns. So my question to you is, has the bid to bring in Ukraine into the alliance, has it upended security at the European level and the global level, or has it enhanced the strength of the alliance?
The way now USA playing its very important role, now Republican elections are going on, US election, and the President Trump is claiming that if he is in the White House, he will prevail upon Putin and there will be no war further. He will stop the war. First question. Second is, there are so many controversies between India and Swedish business deals. To begin with, now recent graphene jets. And earlier it was a buffer issue, also very big issue. And now you have been in Kashmir issue is also a very big issue for India and Sweden. And Madam, you have been having a relationship with India from biotechnology and IT, and we had a problem with mangoes and basmati issue. What is that?
Good afternoon. I'm Pant. I'm a youth entrepreneur and the chairperson of the board of directors of the ECB Sustainability Foundation. So I really loved how both of you brought into the conversation the conflict aspect. So I wanted to know your views on the conflict and the climate nexus, because we are talking about the Russia-Ukraine issue, we are talking about the Israel-Palestine issue, but somewhere we are leaving things like the Horn of Africa and the Lake Chad Basin issue, which as per the WHO are the biggest humanitarian crisis in the world after World War II. In fact, recently I was in Rio de Janeiro for the 5th Global Conference of Synergies, where I was a speaker in the high-level panel along with the presidencies of COP 28, 29, and 30, and the Norwegian Climate Envoy also. I feel, so what I noticed was that there are some efforts, but they are currently siloed for bringing for bridging the connection, for establishing a connection between the climate and the conflict. So would love to know your views on them and how we can build consensus on these 2 different fields, which are intricately linked.
Okay, so let me give the floor to the excellencies and then we'll come back.
First question on Russia's security concerns. We feel in the Baltics, at least in the Baltics, perhaps in the wider region, so that Russia suddenly felt security concerns because its leaders decided. Its leader decided that that is so. We can only remind that, until very recently, in fact, Russia had an ambassador and embassy within NATO. It's so physically, since I've been to NATO headquarters, I can describe to you that all the delegates sit inside the headquarters. So, Russian permanent representation was inside the NATO until very recently. And I would always ask my friends, how come they felt so, how come this relationship was so bad that Russia felt these insecurities if its diplomats were in fact sitting inside the country. And of course, we know from all the insiders, discussions that it's a very calculated decision to make West the enemy, which has happened, in fact, sometime around the famous Munich speech, which Mr. Putin gave, calling the collapse of Soviet Union biggest geopolitical catastrophe. And for us, what they do is in fact a very streamlined attempt at reconstructing the empire under a different name perhaps, and then using anything else as an excuse for that. So it's as simple as this from our perspective. Second thing, Ukraine, well, from what we remember, Ukraine never wanted to be in NATO until it was really aggressed in 2014. That's a fact check you can do, they never applied. There was some consideration, never supported widely. It was an idea that, I mean, even in other non-NATO member countries, there was always, I guess in Sweden, a small percentage, in Finland, a small percentage would say that perhaps we should, but it was never a big thing until they were really, really attacked. And 2014 came to them as a major, game changer in a sense. So saying that this thing became somewhat, an argument for Russia to feel insecure is just not true. Second thing, from the end game perspective, what Russia has achieved by starting this war, it has achieved that NATO has expanded once again. Now we are very happy to be in the Baltic NATO Lake, as we call it sometimes jokingly, because, but that's what he's been happening all the time. You start a fire and then you want to act as a firefighter. This is a very typical activity that we've been facing, and that's why we've been telling, these things happen, please look at them very seriously. So anyway, I can't comment, it's just that, to us it was just so clear, and now it's just so openly validated, what we have been telling that. But the other factor, we could, pretend that we believe, that some things, some other developments have, caused Russia to be insecure. But what about Ukrainian security? It's always, we've always felt why Russia is so insecure. Has it been attacked? Well, we all had countries around who've been attacked, whose territories have been snatched. Never anything happened vis-a-vis Russia, and then yet it's them who are claiming to have this insecurity anyway. I think it's just a big bluff, which they have tried to use to justify the recreation of the empire. And I have to remind also that on the eve of the latest war by Russia, 23rd of February, there were two parts in the speech of Mr. Putin. The first part was about starting the so-called special military operation. The second part was about his historical mission at recreating the greater Russia within the territories of Soviet Union. I'm very sorry to say, but everyone has neglected the second part, but you can't accept the first part without putting in the perspective of a second part. And that's what, that it's openly said. So it's about a neo-imperial war that we are talking about. And which other questions I might take? Conflict climate, okay, I'm not really such an expert to comment on this. I can only, observe that it's always in close connection. Wherever there is a conflict, the climate aspect gets complicated and enlarged. And even in the war against Ukraine, you have seen that horrible, explosion of Kakhovka Dam, which was already, built during the very repressive Stalin's years. So the nature was already aggressed once in the early 50s there, and now you have another, huge impact of the war, which is a huge aggression against nature and the damages, and so on. You still can't think. But we see it also as sometimes as deliberate. Nature is weaponized in a war. That's just what happens everywhere where you need. Where the aggressing side uses all possible things. It weaponizes people, it weaponizes nature, and of course the climatic effects are for everyone to take care afterwards. But again, I'm not such an expert to delve in a wider debate on that particular issue. Mangoes, I'm sorry again, it's very difficult for me to comment on mangoes and basmati because it's a, well, I can only reply that this is a very exclusive, competence by European Union, a commission. Trade is our own policy and, well, that's it. I'm not aware of any particular, apart from sanitary, issues, which, is debated in the expert committees. I don't think we should be discussing something which we don't really do or deal with within the national, competences of our governments. Thank you.
It's so easy to sit next to you, but I will. If I start from the last question, maybe crisis and the climate and environment. I think one has to see it in multiple facets. Of course, some climatic phenomena and developments provoke crisis to erupt. We see how the fight for water in many parts of the world, how food insecurity is leading to upheavals in societies when there is not enough wheat or to make bread or other. We see the same thing when it comes to of course, how climatic factors are affecting the harvests in many countries, and how we have to find new methods of dealing with them. So that's for sure. I think there's a very close relationship between them, and when we, just to take an example for Sweden and India, when we work together in the, for example, in the Lead It framework, when we try to commit the biggest polluters, and now I talk about big industrial polluters, be it cement industry or steel industry, automotive, etc., to commit to by 2050 to have a zero emission. A clean sheet of zero emissions, for example. That is, of course, one step in approaching those who are the big polluters. There are many small polluters too. We have seen the effects of the war that is waged against Ukraine, also not in climatic terms only, but how this has affected food security widely all over the world, how bread prices have gone up in many poorer countries that are very non-resilient when it comes to this kind of price hikes or even impossibility to get what they need. So I don't know if I can say much more than that, but of course, very close link and very important. First question, I think one has to see it, what led to what. And if we had not seen the war of aggression on Ukraine on our doorstep in the heart of Europe, I'm almost sure that our public opinion would not have changed completely. Our policies would not have changed completely. Over the party divides within the government, also everyone got together, and that's how we applied on the 18th of May, 2022, just a couple of months after the war started, to become a NATO member. And I think it's important, and those who have come, Indian visitors who have come, official, non-official, academics who have come to visit Sweden and Stockholm, before they arrive, they don't maybe feel that this is existential, of course, for Ukraine, for Ukrainians, but also for others. When I got home and I saw in my kitchen, my family had put stocks of basic food and the small, the kind of camping stove was standing there in case it was needed and storing water in the basement. And I had been to India just for a few months, and this had changed. I was stunned. And those who come, they also see that this has come very close to home somehow. But anyway, I think that it was the threat that drove us to do what we did. And that was necessary to feel safer and also to make NATO stronger, as I said before. When it comes to, I didn't fully get all the nuances of the question. You addressed the one with mangoes. That one I cannot comment on. I feel in my or in our relations with India, be it on trade, be it on other issues, that we have a very positive agenda. I feel that there are so many issues where we broaden our collaboration with India. The same thing with the European Union. We have negotiations. We have resumed the FTA negotiations with India that we hope will lead to a free trade agreement, that will lead to a trade and investment agreement, that will lead to a pact of geographical designation agreement, etc. So I'm sure there are hurdles, many hurdles. I'm sure there are differences. India is also a very rich country in the sense of so many states in India, as many or even more than we have member states in the European Union. So that there are diverging opinions on our side, diverging opinions on the Indian side is only natural. But the benefits are much bigger than the price of negotiations or of discussing.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Keshav. I'm a journalist with The Print. I have two questions for the ambassador of Sweden. The first being Swedish-India partnership in high technology area. So earlier this year in March, we announced a joint working group in space and geospatial technology, which held their first meeting on the 13th of March, 2024. Last year, there was investments, bilateral sort of investments with regards to space. So I just want an idea of the sort of space partnership and space diplomacy in that sense that's going between India and Sweden. And along with that, I just want to know about, for example, Saab has promised, I think, 25 fighter jets a year in terms of production for India's ambitious multi-role fighter aircraft agreements. I just want to understand the defense side of this partnership and where that is looking. And my second question is something that came from 2 days ago, is that the Swedish government is now offering immigrant families 350,000 krona per person to return home. When we're talking about India offering its demographic dividend to the world, what is this kind of message that comes when we hear that governments are paying people to go back home, right? So how do we then look at this? Because the Indian diaspora is something that the Indian government has been looking to nurture. So how do we then look at this messaging that's coming when we look at these kind of programs? Thank you.
My name is Karni Singh. My first question is to Madam. I just wanted to ask that in the domestic politics of the three Baltic countries, which Russia had actually annexed immediately after the Second World War, and then sort of over a period of time, they gained their independence all over again. During that period of Russian occupation, there must have been a considerable Russification, including the language, etc. So across 2 or 3 generations, right from 1949 on till you got your freedom, 1991 kind of a thing, do people lose sleep that there still might be a very clear pro-Russian kind of a thing, sentiment, which is latent but alive in these populations? So that's just one question. And the second, maybe I'll just ask one question.
Good evening, Excellencies. Good evening, am I audible? Am I audible? Good evening, Excellencies. During conversation, you have emphasized on the fact that by joining the NATO, your security would increase. If you consider the domestic politics of US, the Republicans are not in favor of getting involved in a direct conflict. In recent political interview, Mr. Trump has said Taiwan must pay for his defense, and Mr. Trump has dodged the question uh, uh, of protecting Taiwan from Chinese aggression. And if you observe the conflict being neutral, we can't deny the fact that USA was involved in poking Ukraine against Russia. I am not giving clean chit to Russia. Indeed, Russian Federation is doing aggression in Ukraine. But my question is that how can you rely on the United States for your security?
Okay. My name is Harsh Thakur. I am first year student in Hindu College. I have two questions. Firstly is for the Swedish ambassador. Sir, we are looking at the concept of European strategic autonomy. So Sweden, as a member of NATO, how does it view this concept? And by fulfilling, how does it plan to achieve this vision while simultaneously fulfilling its NATO obligations? Second question is for the Lithuanian ambassador. Ma'am, like you have spoken about the repercussions which Lithuania witnessed amidst Chinese sanctions. So, what do you think are the lessons which it offers for India? And secondly, currently we are seeing Lithuania and the larger Baltics asking for funds from EU in the June to build a wall with Russia. And then we are seeing the situation wherein an evacuation plan was drafted a week ago by the interior minister of Lithuania. And then currently, like a couple days back, Lithuania even allowed German troops to be stationed in Lithuania. So what is this rush for? Is this just deterrence, or do you foresee something happening in near future? Thank you.
Your Excellency, Ambassador of Sweden, I'm KK Roy Chaudhary. Technical expert in energy, environment, and climate change. Given Sweden has committed to achieving net zero by 2045 with 90% reduction in emissions, 90% reductions in emissions with respect to 1990 levels. So I would like to know what are the priorities you have had to set Sweden to the growth path so that this net zero could be achieved.
Yeah, hello. Myself, Pradhan Tyagi. I'm a practicing advocate at Honorable High Court of Delhi. So my question is to both the Honorable Ambassadors of Sweden and Lithuania, that the Honorable Ambassador used the phrase that we all know who started the war, referring it to the Russia, with respect to Russia and Ukraine war which is going on. So there is one narrative that the Russia has imposed a war upon Ukraine people and they are doing all the atrocities. And there is another narrative which says that the war which is going on is because of some acts or some proxy wars maybe going on between Russia and USA. So this is the output of the input given by the US people or the proxy in terms of proxy wars. So which one is true?
Hello, my name is Kanishkwich. I'm the founder of Politicking Me Off. I have a very short question. Recently, a lot of countries have been coming into the foray for maybe mediating between Russia and Ukraine or even hosting peace dialogues. And there are rumors about India also taking a lead. If India does take a lead in this particular avenue, what would be your perspectives? Is it welcome or not?
These questions are all, they could be almost subject of one session each, but I will try to go answer them one by one, and then I will give the floor to my esteemed colleague. I'm very happy that you raised the issue of space. Sweden and India, I think Sweden is one of the countries that concluded the first space cooperation agreement with India. If I'm not misinformed, it was in 1986. Sweden has maybe a feature that maybe not so many are aware of, that in the European Union, or among the European Union member states, there are only 2 member states that have space launching facilities. One of them is France, and but that is not on European Union soil. It's actually in French Guiana. They have a launch site, and Sweden has its S-range site in northern Sweden, and that site has been judged by many, by Americans, by Indians, by others, as a very good for weather condition and for its location as a very good launching site for space vessels. And what we have done, and we have reinvigorated this. We were, of course, everyone was very impressed by the Chandrayaan-3 mission, how India, with limited economic means, could achieve what others with much bigger budgets have not been able to do. And we have intensified our contacts with ISRO. I'm actually going next week together with a delegation of some 22 people headed at political level to Bangalore, to ISRO, to have Sweden-India Space Day. And we will pursue this through the Swedish Space Corporation and through a private enterprise in general. So space is something that is very high on our minds. I think the second question, if I grasped it correctly, was regarding military equipment, and I think the company Saab was mentioned. And Saab has been in India for more than 50 years, and they are establishing their first manufacturing plant in Haryana. I was there for the groundbreaking of that factory a couple of months ago, and we hope that it will be up and running by the fall of 25. And that will be, what is interesting about this plant is that it's the first fully Swedish Saab-owned manufacturing plant for this kind of materials in India. So it's a military manufacturing plant, but owned by a Swedish company. So, and I think that part of the being non-aligned and being neutral for so long has been coupled with the fact that we have built a strong and robust defense. Our defense industry also, if you look at Europe as a whole, you might think that there are defense factories and defense manufacturing in all the 27 member states, but it actually is not the case. We have a very, despite our size, we have a robust such industry. We have the multi-role fighter jet Gripen. We have a lot of things that smaller countries like ours usually don't have. But we have been driven that way, and we are now, of course, these products to defend ourselves in a much more uncertain world is very much in demand. Yes, our Minister for Migration, who I think was appointed a week ago, is that, yeah, we have had a government reshuffle. He made an announcement that there has been in the past also allowances for those who decide to move back to their countries. And is this a bad signal for Indians in Sweden? Absolutely not, because these 350,000 Swedish crowns, which is approximately 32,000 euros, are aimed for people who came to Sweden, driven away from their home countries because of war and conflict, who have not been able to integrate in society, maybe not been able to find jobs, maybe not been able to find the right schooling or go into higher education. And this is a possibility for them to, if the conditions in their home country has improved, to go back and start over again in a better way. So this is actually a way of making it smoother for those who once made a rough ride to Sweden, and we want to avoid that they make a rough ride back. So and it's voluntary, of course. It's a voluntary contribution. It's not, you're not forced in any way. So this is a positive thing, not a negative thing. If I think the next question, if I understood it correctly, because the sound sometimes is a little bit bad, at least for my ears, is if Sweden has somehow lost some of its autonomy to strategic autonomy with its NATO membership. I don't know if that was the question.
How do you view European strategic autonomy, and how do you plan to fulfill your NATO obligations with regards to this vision?
I don't see that there is any conflict between them. Honestly, maybe you see something that I don't see. It's at least not. I mean, being a NATO member gives us certain obligations and also certain rights. But it doesn't exclude that we act not either independently or according to other frameworks outside the NATO one. I think there was another question that came about I think the US and what the support, etc. I mean, Sweden has stated very clearly, and we already fulfilled that this year, we will spend in excess of 2% of our GDP on defense. And of course, it's our opinion that if you are members of the alliance, this should be the aim, and this should be, you should contribute to that. And that's what we intend to do, and that's what we're doing. I don't know if that was really the answer. When it comes to net zero by 2045, the Swedish goal, I think what we have shown, and we are not yet at 2045, but what we have shown in the past is that we can have a healthy growth, we can have a welfare society, we can maintain the level of social benefit, etc., despite being harsh on the environmental standards that we impose. And that comes again, I come back to it again, it comes through innovation. Many people throw innovation in your face and say that, but this is small-scale things, and everything will become more expensive, and everything will become more difficult, and people will suffer. But I think we have actually shown that through innovation, we can improve and go down to the net zero emissions, and companies that were maybe difficult to convince 10, 15 years ago are now fully on board. Again, I come back to the Indian-Swedish initiative of the Leadership Group for Industry Transition. That's exactly what it has proven. And just to round that off, I think that what is the cost today you will see that an investment that you have to make eventually for any country that wants to export onto the world market. If you want to be part of global supply chains, your customers, maybe not at home, but your customers in that chain and in that market will demand certain things from you. They will say, we want eventually green steel. Maybe green steel is not in demand in the market right now, but the customers will eventually demand it. They will demand other things when it comes to the quality of products and services that you have. And that's why, again, green transition, where India is so much on board, is so important. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan. You've taken a good deal of questions, so I will take the rest. One was specifically addressed on Russification efforts. And I have to say it's a much larger, much longer time that we faced Russification because we were under Russian Tsar rule, so to say, since another over 130 years. So in both times, we did face substantial Russification, and there's no doubt about that. But the resistance to this was equally strong. And as, in fact, a result of the first wave of Russification in the 19th century, the huge national revival movement was born. I will speak of Lithuania only because our conditions are all slightly different. Lithuanian revival also came a bit later because of Russification was a bit stronger because of the two rebellions we hosted against Russia in the 19th century. But then if you move ahead to the Soviet Union, of course, it was there equally strong. But as a result, I wouldn't say, I mean, it was always a major trigger to gather around and pull together in terms of a nation, and not something that has influenced, people's views of being pro-Russian or anti-Russian. It's just that we are not Russians, and we have always known that we are not Russians. In terms of national minorities, we host about 5% probably of Russian population, out of which some are indigenous Russian population, which has always lived on the lands of Grand Duchy of Lithuania, which were large lands at that time. So there is no major issue on that. What really is there strong, and that's what we always have to deal with, is a huge Russian propaganda, undercover, overcover in all possible ways. So that's a factor that has been existing. And that's why I think we were able to grasp the internal changes happening in Russia pretty early, till many countries in Europe were still, not able to understand that. But recently, in fact, I learned about the, Russification in Ukraine, and I was shown a list of laws and regulations banning Ukrainian culture, language, anything, religion, whatever. So I think this table would not be enough to hold all the bans that they had suffered through. So it's, I think, amazing that despite all of this nation is proudly here and will live. The question, of course, I won't be commenting on the domestic US and especially electoral policies. What I think is very important that surfaces out of those debates is that debates actually are fed by the concern that Europe has not been paying enough for its own security, which means that US had to pay the bill. And I also agree that this is not a right approach, that Europe has to be paying as much as it is prescribed according to the obligations. And this debate, in fact, which started much earlier in the US, has been really positively impacting, I mean, not just this debate, mostly I think the security situation in Europe, but debate has also been feeding into that the countries have to assume the responsibility, and this is happening. So, of course, the newest member country, Sweden, has proudly pledged 3%, close to that, So I think there's been a shift, significant shift on that. Lithuania too is aiming at 3% now, and in fact, I think by 2027 we are thinking about 3.5, or I mean, even 4% is surfacing in national debates, and this is something we totally agree that it is a priority among the priorities, because this is what you have to pay. So anything, and the question was how you can rely on US security guarantees. So I have to say that we're talking about NATO security guarantees, which is a collective security agreement where countries have various definitions and divisions of labor and responsibilities. And we contribute to that as well. We might be small, but it's all in percentages. It's percentages from your economy. So any percentage counts because it's your just and fair thing. Yes, we are starting very soon to host a German brigade, which will be something that is, definitely going to substantially contribute to our sense of security in very tangible ways. Rheinmetall is also starting the big factory of ammunition in Lithuania. So this is yet one more layer, economic layer, with a very heavy security, load related to that. So I think this is where we move, why we can trust, because we see how much it has evolved adequately vis-a-vis the threats assessment. Because the problem for us was, and Jan, you were mentioning about the food and preparation on food and camping stoves, for us it was much more dramatic, because when Russia started the war, we would wake up, everyone, every Lithuanian, that I would guarantee you, 6 o'clock, you are in bed, you switch on your iPhone or whatever phone you have, and think about the only thing, is Kiev still standing? That was like the idea you wake up with. It is still there. Okay, then we take a nap and wake up and start the day. And for us it was really but the major thing, because if Kiev falls, that means we have to pack up, not just the stove, but we probably have to run. So we trust, because we have seen that in NATO summit, that the previous, now not the last one, which Lithuania hosted, was the place and venue where very serious, down to detail contingency plans were prepared for us. And now we know, because until then, apparently NATO did not have that contingency, because again, to assuage some sort of, concerns Russia might have, we did not have permanent troops. So we were NATO, but we did not have. Now we will have. That will be a serious thing, which we think a real deterrent would be. Okay. Now this question, who started the war, the output of the input, I really think I have already commented on that. It's Russian troops might not be performing on the battle very well, and the Russian economy might not also be very well, but where they are really good is at perceptions, at shaping perceptions. And I can only say that, yes, they have been fantastic in being able to invert everything and, suddenly, without suffering any assault, being able to blame everybody else for provoking them. I think I just don't need to comment on that. Indian potential, well, of course, we welcome everyone's contribution to the peace process, and I think the visit of Honorable Prime Minister Modi to Ukraine was very timely and very loaded with a lot of important messages. So let both sides, take in the messages to the full. And of course, anybody's wise word, strong word would be very, very helpful to end this terrible war. But then, of course, it will be for Ukrainians. As always, I would like to return the ball to Ukrainians, who are the main victim in this and who are the only victim, actually, who will have to, be comfortable with whatever solutions have to be negotiated. What else? The wall, right? Financing the wall. There was something about that. So this is of course, one more very unfortunate episode of something we call the hybrid war, because wars, unfortunately, are not just one on the war, waged on the battlefield, but also hybrid wars in information, in some other attacks. Our region has been facing until now a very serious hybrid, action in which the migrants were weaponized and sent to us, to our territories, which were unprotected by any barrier. So you had the war, and I have a country house on the border with Belarus. Literally, I see the wall. I mean, now I see the wall because the wall is there, but there was nothing until now. And when thousands of people started marching in, from troubled areas like Iraq, where you could also fear certain ideologies being brought into your land, and we are tiny. So, you know, with a population being of such small scale and thousands of people coming from elsewhere, facilitated and brought by, you know, border security of Belarus, clearly with the support of, you know, other big country. Of course, we had to protect our sovereignty, and we didn't wait for anybody to pay for it. We just built a wall because this is what was absolutely necessary. Other countries faced this threat slightly later, and the situation was evolving. So I understand now the debate in the European Union is favoring protection of EU external border and prioritizing it even with EU money, which is, of course, I think something that reflects the evolving situation, because situation is far from over. And definitely there are forces which are continuing to look for other loopholes in wherever you can send in people, and then again, you know, start a war and become a become a firefighter of that sort. So this is just a reflection of realities that we have to face, and we are reacting adequately.
I think we have had a very honest and open view of what the Nordic and Baltic perception is of the current conflict, of the current war, of the security situation, and also India's relations with not only Sweden and Lithuania, but also with the wider Nordic Baltic combined. So thank you, Excellencies, for joining us this afternoon. It was a pleasure hosting you, and we learned a lot. And hopefully this conversation will continue as this progress. So please join us.